I want to record this. Okay, we want to figure out what the degree of this polynomial is. So what's the degree of that polynomial? If you need to put a 1 up here to help you think about that, when it's in the factored form like that, we're going to add those exponents. So the degree of that polynomial is 3. If they're in the factored form, we're going to have to add these exponents. Okay? If it's in factored form already, we're going to add those exponents together to figure out what the degree is. And the other examples you've seen, I think so far, it's just been like one polynomial where it's been like x to the 4th minus 3x cubed plus 2x squared, that type of thing. I think
it's always the biggest, like the highest.
On those, it's the highest degree, correct. So there was one earlier, it's a good question, Sheridan. There was one earlier where we were trying to figure out what the degree was and the leading coefficient, and it looked something like this. It was like f of x equals, and it had like 4x squared minus 5x cubed plus 7. The highest degree for this polynomial is 3, so the degree of this polynomial is 3.
It would be like you use odd negative. That's how the calculation.
Correct. Great question. Glad you're kind of thinking about that and mentioning that, because that's good review, refresher for us. Okay, so the degree of this polynomial, because we're going to add those exponents, is 3. We need to look at the leading coefficient and decide if it's positive or negative, because that's going to help us decide up, down, all of that good stuff, right? So the leading coefficient is positive. So we have an odd degree. That tells us opposite direction, right? Positive tells us that means we are going down to the left and up to the right. Okay, we good with that? So ultimately, if you wanted to kind of draw that in here, just realize we're probably going to have to shift where we draw that. But ultimately, we want this graph, it's going to ultimately start going down, and it's going to be going up on the right-hand side. Okay? Then we want to think about our zeros, and we want to think about our multiplicity. So what are our zeros? So one of our zeros is x equals negative 2. One of our zeros is x equals 3. So x equals negative 2, what's the multiplicity on that?
2.
Yep, that's a multiplicity 2. So what does that mean? Are we touching or bouncing there? I'm sorry, are we bouncing or crossing there? We're bouncing. And at x equals 3, the multiplicity is 1. There's only one of those. So we are crossing there, aren't we? Okay. We'll draw those points in. So those are our x-intercepts. We also want to kind of figure out where our y-intercept is. So to find our y-intercept, we're going to set x equal to 0. And if we do that, we're actually going to end up doing a couple of points, not many, but let's plug in x equals 0. And if we do that, we get 2 times 0 plus 2 is 2 squared. So we get 4 times 0 minus 3, so negative 3. So we get negative 24. So this graph's going way low. We're not going to be able to draw that. We're going to kind of get the general idea of where that is, right? Okay, we're going to decide on some other points, but we're going to decide on that once we kind of get an idea of what's going on here. So we have a 0 at x equals negative 2. And then we have another 0 at x equals 3. Now, the other thing that I like to do is kind of draw in and remind myself, okay, at x equals 3, we are crossing. We're going through there, so I'm going to kind of draw a line through there to remind myself it's going through there. If we have a bounce, the issue is we need to decide. The bounce might be above the x-axis or it might be below. So part of it is kind of thinking through or figuring that part of it out. So a lot of times it helps to figure out what a corresponding point would be near that value to help you decide on that if you're not quite sure. We can kind of think about what this is telling us also, because that's going to give us an idea of whether it would be, the bounce would be above the x-axis or below. But putting in some other points is definitely going to help with that also. So if we plug in that point, that 0, negative 24, basically I'm just going to put a point way down here to help us think about where that point would be, right? I would suggest, I don't know, what do you think? We probably want to plug in like x equals 2 maybe, and see where that, where this graph is at x equals 2, just to help us get an idea of what the graph looks like. So that would mean we're at 2 times 2 plus 2 is 4, squared is 16, times 2 minus 3 is negative 1. Wow, so we're still way low. At x equals positive 2, we're even lower than we were, so we're going way down. And then we're having to come back up. We're crossing through here. We know it has to cross here. So in order for us to be that low and finish off by going this direction, this is where the bounce is going to have to be. So we know it's bouncing somehow, some way, probably about like that. And that's all we need to do for this graph. We don't have to be real fancy and have real precise points. We're just trying to get a rough sketch. Let me try to clean this up a little bit though, because we had to move where those final arrows were, right? Okay, questions or thoughts there? Did the steps seem just as bad when I was talking you through that as opposed to all of this up here? I hope not. But I don't know, maybe. But we're just going through and thinking about the things that we've just learned about, right? And kind of using that. Okay? Thoughts? Questions? Okay, so let's try that other one. I'm going to ask you guys to help me out a little bit more on this next one. Here we go. Okay. All right, so what are we going to look at first? What are we going to decide on? The degree. So what is the degree of this polynomial? 4, yep, that sounds good. The degree is 4. So that tells us we know we're going same direction, either both up or both down. So what's the leading coefficient? Is it positive or negative? Positive. So a positive leading coefficient for an even degreed polynomial, what does that mean is happening? Is it down, down, or up, up? Up, up. Right? Does that make sense? So ultimately we're going about like this, and we'll erase those and kind of clean them up in a little bit, but hopefully that kind of helps you think about what's got to happen here. Okay? So we've got the direction for our end behavior. We need to figure out our zeros. So we've got a few zeros here. We've got x equals negative 2. We have x equals 3. We have x equals 1. And here we have the multiplicity of 2. So that's telling us that's where we have a bounce. We're crossing at both of these, aren't we? Right? Okay, so we have these 3 points. So negative 2, positive 1, positive 3. Right? Let's find our y-intercept, and then let's decide, we may want to come up with some other points just to try to help us. Oops. I'm just getting excited. I'm gonna make a little note here for myself. At x equals negative 2, it's crossing, so I'm gonna kind of draw the line to go through to remind myself of that. At x equals positive 3, it's crossing here. It's gonna have to bounce here. So once again, we're gonna have to decide, is it bouncing above the x-axis or below? So let's choose some points around it to kind of help us with that. But let's plug in 0 if we plug in x equals 0, then we're going to get 2 times -3 times -1 squared, which just gives us 1. So 0, -6. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Boom, there's a point on this graph. So I don't know, what do you think? If I'm thinking I want to plug in -1 and +2 just to get an idea of what's happening. So -1, 2 minus 1 is 1. -1 minus 3 is -4. -1 minus 1 is -2. We square that, we get +4. So we get a -16. So at -1, we're way down here, even lower. At +2, where are we? 2 plus 2 is 4. 2 minus 3 is -1. And 2 minus 1 is just 1 squared. Okay, so we get -4 here. So at +2, we're at -4. All right, so your thoughts here? I actually got so excited that I did all of this work instead of making you guys do it. I love these. I think it's fun. It's a puzzle to try to put together. So what does this graph look like? What do you think? Ultimately, it has to go up this direction and up this direction. So we know that part, but what else is happening there?
Cross to touch the -6.
Okay, yep, it's gonna have to hit that -6, but it's gotta hit this also first, so it's gonna come way down and then hit this. So is it bouncing below the x-axis or above the x-axis? Based on these numbers. It's gotta be below, doesn't it? Okay. We don't know what's going on here. But somehow, some way, it's gonna come back up and it's going and crossing through there, right? Okay. It's a degree of 4. I'm seeing 3 turning points, so yeah, that kind of fits. Right? All right, what do you think? Thumbs up, middle, down, somewhere in between. Sydney's saying thumbs up. Morgan, what do you think? Thumbs up.